Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. Explore the strange world of time slips with 3 more true and gripping accounts of the past intersecting with the present. Witness Emelia's bewildering journey into Colonial Philadelphia. Accompany Mrs. Allen in Highgate, England, as she lives out a time slip into the future. And follow Lily's unexpected detour into a hotel and street from the dawn of the previous century in Sonoma, California. Colonial Philadelphia. Emelia May was just an ordinary 12-year-old girl from suburban New Jersey, but one fateful trip to Philadelphia in 2005 would prove to be anything but ordinary. As Emelia and her parents, Linda and Tom May, toured the historic sites around Independence Hall, she could not have imagined the strange events that were about to unfold. The Mays had decided to take a weekend trip to Philadelphia to show Emelia where the Founding Fathers had signed the Declaration of Independence over 200 years earlier. They arrived on Friday evening and spent Saturday seeing the Liberty Bell and other landmarks near Independence Hall. On Sunday morning, they headed back to the area for one last walk before departing late that afternoon. As they strolled down Chestnut Street, Emelia told her parents she needed to use the restroom at the nearby visitors center. After finishing, Emelia exited the bathroom and was surprised to find the hallway empty. She called out for her parents, but there was no answer. Puzzled, she made her way outside, figuring they must be waiting there for her. But when she stepped onto the street, Emelia stopped dead in her tracks. The street scene before her was like nothing she'd ever seen. The buildings looked ancient, some even run down. The people were dressed in odd clothing, long dresses, suits with tails, and strange 3-pointed hats. Horse-drawn carriages clip-clopped down the dusty street. One man walked by in a dark blue and red uniform, yet another 3-pointed hat, a musket slung over his shoulder. Emelia stood frozen, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. Where were all the tourists? What happened to the visitors centre? As Emelia gazed around in disbelief, a concerned-looking man in waistcoat and breeches approached her. "Young lady, what are you wearing? Where are your parents?" he asked. Terrified, Emelia mumbled incoherently before turning and running back in the direction she thought she'd come from. But where the visitors centre bathroom had been, there was now just a solid brick wall. Overwhelmed by confusion and fear, Emelia sank to the ground against the wall and began sobbing. She had no idea how much time had passed when she suddenly heard her mother's voice calling her name. Emelia looked up with tearful eyes to see her parents rushing towards her. They quickly embraced her, asking what had happened and why she'd disappeared. According to her mother, Emelia had been gone for nearly 15 minutes, although it had felt considerably longer to her distraught daughter. Her father had checked the bathroom during this time but found no sign of Emelia. On the car ride back to New Jersey, Emelia tearfully recounted a terrifying experience of being inexplicably transported back to old Philadelphia. Though her parents tried to rationalize it as a vivid daydream or hallucination, deep down they knew something unexplainable had happened to their daughter. Emelia knew it was real. She could still picture every detail clearly. The old buildings, the clothing, the horse carriages. She lived through an event that defied logic and reason. In the months and years that followed, Emelia occasionally had vivid dreams about the incident. The images and sensations never faded completely from her memory. She saw a therapist for a while who diagnosed her with anxiety and PTSD related to the trauma of the event. Though well-adjusted as an adult, Emelia still shudders recalling that disorientating day in Colonial Philadelphia. A time slip of past and future self. The year was 1976 in the quiet North London suburb of Highgate. Young Charlie Mills resided there with his parents, Pat and Janet. Though a regular working-class family, the Mills occasionally rubbed elbows with some of the more elite, old-money residents of Highgate, thanks to Pat's handyman skills. One such neighbour was Mrs. Edith Allen. a frail elderly widow who had grown up in her family's Victorian estate on Pond Square. Despite being in her 80s, Mrs. Allen still lived alone in the old house, keeping up her quirky old traditions. But she was harmless, and Charlie's father Pat often helped maintain her home. One evening in late June, the Mills family received an unexpected knock at their door. It was Mrs. Allen, looking even paler than usual. In a trembling voice, she asked for Pat, saying there was something she needed to discuss with him. Curious, Mr. Mills followed Mrs. Allen back to her home. He was gone nearly half an hour when Charlie and his mother wondered what errand required Pat's urgent attention. When Pat returned, he related a bizarre story told by him by Mrs. Allen. She'd been using the downstairs washroom when a young girl of about 5 or 6 had wandered in. The child, dressed in an old-fashioned blue dress, looked startled upon seeing Mrs. Allen. "Oh, Mummy didn't tell me where I'd guess," the girl had exclaimed before turning and scurrying way down the hall, calling for her mother. Mrs. Allen was unnerved by this peculiar encounter for one simple reason. She remembered the exact same incident happening to her as a child 80 years ago. As a little girl, she had also been surprised to find an elderly woman in the washroom. She described the woman as a mirror image of her current self. Though Pat was sceptical by nature, even he had to admit the coincidental circumstances were eerie. When he asked Mrs. Allen why she'd summoned him, she replied, "I need to know if I'm going batty. Did I really see myself as a child, or am I losing my marbles from the heat wave?" Pat tried to calm her, saying her mind was still sharp as a tack. But privately, he wondered if the old woman had somehow glimpsed into the past and future via a wrinkle in time. Over tea and biscuits back home, Pat told Charlie and Janet about Mrs. Allen's strange experience. Janet worried for the woman's mental state, but Charlie was thrilled at the possibility. He begged his dad to let him visit Mrs. Allen and hear more firsthand, but Pat forbade it, saying the last thing the rattled woman needed was to be bothered by a nosy 12-year-old. Charlie did keep tabs on Mrs. Allen after that, saying hello whenever he saw her in the yard. She never brought up the incident again, but Charlie detected a new fragility about her, as if her two-way glimpse through time had shaken her sense of reality. She passed away 2 years later in 1978, taking her secrets with her. As an adult, Charlie retained his fascination with unexplained phenomena. In his old age, Charlie still reminisces about that long-ago summer when space-time seemed to overlap in Highgate. He wonders if alternate realities and past echoes can seep through for those with eyes to see. Though she acted rattled at the time, Charlie liked to think Mrs. Allen's peek across the decades brought more magic than unease into her final years. Out of sync in Sonoma. It was meant to be a normal Saturday morning in Sonoma, California for 10-year-old Lily Haynes and her parents, but a detour into the past would lead to an experience Lily would never forget. It was early 2001 and the Haynes family were exploring Sonoma, California's historic plaza. Lily begged to peek inside the old hotels and houses that now hosted museums and gift shops catering to tourists. With some reluctance, Lily's parents allowed her to dart off on her own into one of these museums, assuming she would quickly re-emerge. But several minutes passed with no sign of Lily. Inside this museum, Lily made her way through the exhibits. Turning a corner, she was startled to see not a museum gallery, but a small hotel lobby with a front desk and patrons milling about in old-fashioned attire. Confused, Lily approached the front desk and spoke to the clerk. "Excuse me, where am I? And what year is it?" she asked timidly. "Why, you're in Sonoma, miss, and the year is 1912, replied the man. The man also mentioned the name of the hotel, although in the confusion of the moment, Lily failed to remember its name. Lily's eyes widened in shock. 1912? How could that be possible? She dashed outside only to confront more evidence that she'd been transported into the past. Horse-drawn carriages clopped down the street. Women wore long dresses and hats, and there were only a few, albeit antique, automobiles in sight. Lily began to panic. Where were her parents? How would she get back home? Lily turned and ran back into the lobby, but instead of a busy hotel, she now saw the familiar museum exhibits. She had returned to the present. Overcome with relief, Lily burst into tears. Moments later, her frantic parents appeared. "Lily, where have you been? You scared us half to death." They embraced her tightly, wiping her tears away. As Lily relayed her astounding tale, her parents were justifiably skeptical. Surely their daughter's active imagination was playing tricks on her. But Lily stubbornly insisted it had been real. She could still picture the old hotel lobby. The decor, the fashion and the antique carriages and cars as clear as day. Her parents finally smiled and soothed her, just glad she was okay. In the following days and weeks, Lily told anyone who would listen about her leap into the past, but she was met with understandable disbelief by family, friends and teacher. In time, Lily herself began to doubt the vivid memories. Had she imagined it all? The years passed and the event gradually faded into the hazy realm of childhood fantasy. It was not until her late 20s, in 2018, that Lily returned to Sonoma, her husband in tow. As they toured the plaza, Lily felt an eerie sense of déjà vu approaching the museum she'd entered all those years ago. The memories of the day came flooding back. She insisted they walk through the museum, where she pointed out the very spot she'd crossed over as a girl. Her husband teased her about her wild story, but Lily knew in her heart she'd briefly glimpsed the past that day. Some strange wrinkle in time had transported her to 1912 Sonoma and back in the blink of an eye.